So, good people, today we continue on our February journey. And so, the February theme that I've selected has been living into our strength. Many of us, I've talked to many of you and heard stories, and maybe even partly my own journey, feeling tired, feeling overwhelmed, feeling stressed, maybe feeling sick. Anybody in that boat? Feeling any of that? Yeah. See a lot of head nods, right? Yeah. And so the power for this month is strength. And I felt like I wanted to kind of really go in on that this month with us. Because strength is the ability to be patient even when things in the exterior are not in alignment with what we'd like to see for our lives or the lives of our loved ones. It's about being tolerant and steadfast. It's about balance and peace and stillness. And it's also about that strength that allows us to balance our thoughts and our words with our deeds so that we are in alignment with spiritual connection. And our co-founder, Charles Filmer, talked about strength as really just the energy of God. So connecting in on that is really about channeling that energy of the Spirit to allow for life to flourish within us and around us and between us, and to allow for that energy to animate our lives. He says that all strength originates in spirit. And that's important for us to understand and know. It's not an exterior strength that we're talking about. It's something that is deep and internal within us that we are gifted and blessed with by Holy Spirit. When we talked last time, 2 weeks ago, we talked about the strength of purpose. And what I suggested to us is that we have to cultivate a why in our lives. Many of us are just sort of on the rat wheel, right? Or we're on the kind of autopilot, and sometimes we don't even realize it. And the important thing is for us to sort of really tap into, what is my why? Why am I here? And even though we may not know it immediately, and I shared my story of struggling for years and years trying to understand, what is my why? But the idea is for us to be patient around that and to know that when we have a sense of purpose, science now shows that it has so many benefits from a physical standpoint, emotional, and obviously spiritual. I used the story of Holocaust survivor and scientist and psychologist and mental health expert, if you will, Viktor Frankl, who's known for the famous quote that he says, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." And so we were talking about the fact that we can do hard things as long as we understand our why. Today, we're going to move on to talk about the strength of love. Love, we're told in our spiritual tradition, coming from our tradition with our master teacher, Jesus, that loving is the most important thing that we can do other than being in connection with God. So it's God and love, but it's really the same thing because God is the expression of love and we become the expressions of God through loving. And so we're talking about that important thing today about how do we center our lives on love? How do we center our lives to love? And how does strength allow us to love? And how is loving giving us strength? We live in a world that is starved for love. And part of it is the emotional that we're talking about, what we understand as the emotive love, the caring for people. But what we're talking about here is a higher level truth about love. It's this idea, this concept, this feeling, this knowing, this interconnectedness that we as beings are love, and we are brought here to this iteration of life with one larger mission, and that mission is so simple yet so hard: to love. And so we look at that here today. How do we not stay in that disconnection? How do we not stay in that fear, in that hurt, in that shame, in that guilt, in order to allow ourselves to be channels of love? I want to start really today kind of giving us some definitions, because I always think it's good for us to have something that we can kind of hang our hat on or anchor ourselves in. Charles Fillmore, our co-founder, is really well known for this particular quote on love. And he says, love is the attracting, harmonizing, unifying, equalizing, binding, or cementing idea of divine mind. So that it's something that is, when we love, it brings goodness to us. It brings that connection with spirit, with God, with the allness, with the oneness, with the eternal, the God of your understanding, the higher power of your understanding. When we're loving, we are truly in that channeling energy. We become that. And so it's that attractive force, he's saying, which is why we know that love is the supreme thing that allows for all of these other faculties or qualities or gifts or blessings to come in. Eric Butterworth, one of my favorite and very famous Unity minister, has long since transitioned, talks a lot about this concept of love. He says, because love is divine law, it cannot be violated without penalty. It is love or else. So he's letting us know when we go against our spiritual nature, there's a high cost to pay. He says to withhold the love, regardless of the reason, is to reject the vital power to be healthy and happy and successful. Man is so created that he cannot withhold love and remain healthy or happy or fulfilled. He may feel justified in hating or resisting. He may feel that there are those he simply cannot bring himself to love. Anybody feel that? Like, can't love that person. Okay, thank you, Julie, Mr. Julius. Preaching, right? Testifying. We can't. That some people, it's hard to love. We can't bring ourselves. But he says in every case, this leads to impoverishment. To withhold love is to withhold the very thing we need more at that time than any other. For the absence of love separates us from our resource and creates a gulf between those around us. He goes on to say, we cannot love this one and hate that one. We must love all universally. Love is not a personal feeling or an emotion. It is neither sense nor sex. It merely uses these areas as a conduit through which it expresses in the process of transcendental oneness. Love is divine law, which flows impersonally like electricity through all who allow themselves to be open and non-resistant channels. Finally, he says, love is a magic catalyst that lifts up and transforms and fulfills all whom it expresses and all to whom it is directed. And finally, one short quote. I'm going to talk a little bit about Elizabeth Sand Turner, who many of you may or may not know was the first minister here at Unity of Nashville many moons ago. And her mother was actually the founder of this church. And she was very well known in Unity back in her day, after she even left here after a number of years being the first minister, going on throughout the whole country, as a speaker of truth and sharing the unity message. And she wrote several books, one of which is called Let There Be Light. And in this book, she says, love is the coordinating, unifying principle of being. And when one is guided by spiritual love, all the forces of his nature are harmonized and strengthened. So we're looking at love from a very different vantage point than what we're used to thinking. Love is this quality, it is this energy, it is this force that is within us, that is natural to us, even though we think it may not be. And more importantly, it is a necessity for us as human beings, as creatures, as beloveds of the divine, for us to express it. If we don't, then we are stifling our very being and find ourselves stuck in many areas of our life. Elizabeth Sand Turner, in her book, Let There Be Light, focuses on a particular chapter about love and uses the figure in the Bible of David. Anybody remember David? Yes? I see a lot of hands. You know, David was known, obviously, as a very important figure in the Bible. Legacy as a very strong ruler of the Israelites, right? The divine love, using himself as a servant of God, wanting to love his people, to be able to sacrifice himself and do things in the benefit of his community. We also may or may not know David figures in another biblical story that most people don't know about, that is in the Apocrypha, which is a set of books that are in some Bible versions and not others, but it's called the Book of Susanna. And in that book, David stands for love and for justice. He finds out that there is a woman who is being accused of adultery. And in those times, adulterers, well, female ones at least, were stoned to death. And the reason why she's being accused of this by two elders in the community, elders who are also the spiritual and political leaders of the community, is because they wanted to be with her. They wanted to sleep with her, and she rebuked them. And so in retaliation, they created this story. To make a really long story short, David hears of this and believes the young woman and steps in where no one else would to defend her, and ultimately finds the truth, which was they were lying. He stands in this light to be able to be the voice of justice, particularly those who oftentimes are not heard. Most of us know David from what? David and what? Goliath. See, y'all are really good Bible students, dag. David and Goliath, you know, the Philistine giant that called the question on the Israelites, and the Philistines were the starch enemies. And so when this happened, you know, they were very fearful. There was a lot of fear and anxiety and anguish around having to be challenged by the Philistines. And David steps up, not being a warrior of any sort, and says, I will stand and defend against my people, against the giant. And as we know, what did he have, y'all? Slingshot and a stone. Thank you, Daya. And a stone, and boop, pops the stone in the giant's head, and there he falls, right? He stands as, again, this idea of love, allowing love for his community, allowing love for his fellow people to be able to anchor, given that strength, relying on spirit. You know, that's a Bible story, right? And I'm not going to go into a little bit in the interest of time, but it's one story, but we have so many stories that are similar in so many ways. So David was small in stature, as they say, and we've got this giant. And how could this person beat this giant? The story for us in this metaphysically is that we're facing giants all the time. Things that seem so far out, things that seem like they will never happen and move. It's intractable. And yet, strength of love tells us differently. Have y'all ever heard of these, what people sometimes call urban legends of the mama bear, the mother's strength lifting up a car to save their child? They are actually not urban legends. These are verified stories that happen over and over again through time. Lawrenceville, Georgia, 1982. Angela Carvalho, 50-year-old woman, middle-aged, mother, grandmother, Friday night, cooking dinner. Her son, junior in high school, is outside, got his 64 Chevy Impala jacked up, working on it. And all of a sudden, she hears a crash and scream. The car falls on her son. She runs out, starts screaming for help. The neighbors come, and she recalls she doesn't remember the rest of what happened. But people recall what happened, where she went into a zone and she lifted that car up enough for people to pull her son out. 2012, Lauren Kornacki, 22-year-old woman in Glen Allen, Virginia, raised a BMW 521i off her father when the car toppled from a jack. Events like this happen, and it's not just vehicles, like when Lydia Angiao went toe-to-toe with a polar bear in northern Quebec to protect her son and friends while they played hockey. A bear. Who's ready to go toe-to-toe with a polar bear? Scientists call this hysterical strength. They say that it's that fear factor that sets in, that drives this part of the brain that they don't understand and really can't explain, but something happens that gives people this innate strength. I believe that it happens, but I don't believe that it comes from fear. I believe that that strength comes from deep love. Because you're wanting to save your beloved, yes? You're wanting your loved one. So whatever else happens, the driving force is, this is my son. I must do something to save him. It's coming from love. So I ask you all here this morning, we have to think about the fact that demonstrations happen when we focus on the strength of love. We think of them as miracles, but they really are demonstration of law, of what we have untapped inside of us, that when the question is called, we have the resources to do things that are greater than we can ever think possible. So I ask, has heartbreak or sorrow or trauma or hurt or fear or shame or guilt closed you to love? Are you open? Are you willing to be open, to be the loving channel of the Spirit? What giants could you slay in your life if you focus on the strength of love, the love that you have for your partner or your family, or maybe just your passion, your purpose, your why, focusing in on that love that will animate your life? We have to call the question on ourselves and be honest. Have we forgotten how to express love? And have we forgotten how to express love and goodness and godness, not just with ourselves or with those close to us or those that we like or love, but generally with the world? Imagine what we could do collectively if we double down on love. As I move to close, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the book, Strength to Love, which is a very well-known book by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It was published in 1963, and it's a collection of sermons that Reverend Dr. King delivered during his time as a pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. And these sermons tackle issues, a variety of aspects of things like love and justice and faith and the struggle for racial equality. And he offers invaluable insights into his own philosophy of nonviolence and his commitment to achieving equality for all. The book's title, Strength to Love, encapsulates really the central theme, the power of love to transform individuals and society. Now, Dr. King firmly believed that love has the strength to conquer hate and injustice, and advocated for the use of nonviolence resistance as a means for achieving social change. So in this book, he argues persuasively that love, rather than violence or revenge, is the ultimate weapon against what we think of as evil or oppression. Some of his most famous quotes come from this book. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only love can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. But love, I think if we're really honest, can be very difficult. And it's not difficult because it is counter to us. As I have already said, it is part of us. It is innate to us, but we've built so many walls and there's so many things happening outside of us that we focus on and resonate into instead of in the truth, that we distance ourselves from that. It is easy to hate. Why? Because you don't have to be vulnerable. You don't have to take responsibility. You don't have to risk. But love, that is the work that we have been brought here to do. And love, my beautiful people, is a choice that we make daily. It is a choice that we have to make daily. We have to be proactive about choosing love every day. And maybe some days we choose self-love. That's what we need, and that's what we have to do for that day. I'm focusing on me, or focusing on my family, or choosing to love those that are difficult to love. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Words that we are told were spoken by Jesus in Mark 12. Centering on love. Before I close, I just want to share a story. I just came back from Mexico celebrating my wife Veronica's grandfather's 95th birthday. And on the way back, we transferred or had a plane change in Houston. And this young man sat next to me. And when he sat down, I could tell he was a little disheveled. I could tell that he was a little confused. And it turned out he didn't speak English. And so he was asking me some questions about kind of logistics of where to sit. He didn't even know, yada, yada. So I kind of acclimated him and we chatted for a little bit. And as the plane time went on, he began to share some of his story. This young man was coming from Venezuela. He decided that he needed to leave home. He traveled for 4 months, 8 countries by foot. He traveled through Venezuela, through Colombia, through Panama, through Honduras, through Guatemala, through Mexico to the United States. When he arrived in the United States, he was taken in by Immigration and Naturalization Services, and he was shackled, his hands and his feet. Everything was taken from him, and he was put in a prison, left to not shower for 10 days, very little food. He told me a lot about his experience, a very powerful story. He crossed jungles, treacherous terrain, told me a story about passing an older gentleman who had fallen in this jungle terrain and would appear to have broken his ankle. It was bruised and swollen. He couldn't walk anymore. In these instances, people come through long distances knowing they'll be going far for a long time. They don't carry much, and they don't carry much food. And the food they have, they eat as they go along. This man couldn't go on, so he was left there to essentially wait out his time to die. And as people passed, including this young gentleman, they offered him a little bit of food, at least so that he would have some quality of life as time passed. He showed me videos of how they were riding trains through Mexico that are very well known. You can even YouTube it, where people jump on top of trains to be able to make their way through Mexico and other parts of Latin America. What he shared with me, though, was the love that he received from people along his journey. Strangers who didn't know him, strangers who had no stake in this game, strangers who had no real idea of what he was even going through, even if he didn't share his story. And yet there was this call to love by human beings. When I asked him, what would possess you to want to do this? And he said, my son, the love for my son. I want him to have a better life. I want him to have the things that I can't give him. I want to set a light for him in the United States that maybe one day he can come. I don't want any handouts, he said. I just want to work and live and love. That, to me, good people, is a story of what we call hysterical strength. It's a strength that comes from love that defies all odds. It is a strength that allows you to slay a giant. We have that in us. We have that all around us. Couples that love, even though social convention or religious traditions or otherwise tells them not, and yet they have the strength to love and to live and to share that light and that energy and that beauty with the world. I close by offering you these stories and these concepts as a way to engage you all to think about how you all too can be hysterically in love. Sounds funny. Who's ready to be hysterically in love? Yes, all right. Come on now, I like it. Love slays dragons. Love finds the way. Love always wins. And so today we move forward celebrating this power of love to overcome all. And so it is, and so we let it be. Amen.